Imagine stepping into the shadowy halls of a medieval castle. The air is damp, carrying the faint musk of wet stone and firewood smoke. Torches flicker, casting long shadows against tapestries that have seen generations of lords and ladies. But beneath the grandeur, beneath the armor, the feasts, the banners of war, there lurked a problem so basic, so human, that no amount of chivalry or divine blessing could escape it. Where did everyone go? We often picture knights in shining armor, kings on golden thrones, and peasants tilling the soil, but rarely do we pause to think about the other throne, the medieval toilet. It wasn't just a convenience. It was a reflection of class, technology, and even morality. Castles weren't built with plumbing in mind. Instead, they had garderobes, tiny, closet-like chambers built into the castle walls, perched high above the ground. A wooden seat, a hole, and gravity did the rest. Waste would tumble into a cesspit, or sometimes directly into the moat below. Romantic, isn't it? But while nobles perched above in their stone towers, peasants lived in a very different world. Most villages had little more than ditches, communal pits, or, if you were unlucky, just a designated corner of the street. Human waste wasn't simply an inconvenience. It was everywhere, flowing through towns, collecting in alleys, even soaking into the very foundations of the places people call home. The smell? Unimaginable. Travelers often wrote about European cities reeking to the heavens. The streets were dangerous not just because of thieves, but because of what might fall from an upstairs window when you walked past. Medieval toilets weren't just dirty, they were deadly. They became breeding ground for disease, sources of fire hazards, and even targets for assassins. Yes, the bathroom could kill you, and in the Middle Ages, it often did. Step inside the garderobe of a medieval fortress. The walls are narrow, stone cold against your shoulders as you squeeze through the passageway. A tiny slit of light falls across the floor. Ahead is a wooden seat with a round hole cut into it. Beneath that, a vertical shaft carved into the very wall of the castle, leading down into the moat or cesspit below. This was the noble's toilet, the garderobe. The name comes from the French word's meaning, to guard one's robes. Why? Because some lords believed that hanging clothes near the toilet warded off moths, the foul smell keeping insects at bay. Imagine slipping into your best velvet doublet, knowing it had been stored right above the waste chute. Hygiene was creative, but the garderobe wasn't always private. In many castles, toilets were built side by side with multiple seats. Lords, knights, and even monks might sit together, doing their business shoulder to shoulder, continuing conversations about war, taxes, or theology. Privacy was not a medieval luxury. In fact, defecating was often considered less shameful than letting people see you bathe, since nudity carried far more moral weight than relieving oneself. Yet the garderobe was dangerous. The waste pits beneath were never perfectly sealed. Methane gas could build up, and combined with torchlight, explosions sometimes occurred. Chroniclers tell of castle latrines catching fire from the very air inside them. And there was another threat: attackers. During sieges, waste shafts could become weak points. Some enemies crawled up the filth-filled tunnels to infiltrate castles. The very place designed for relief could suddenly become an entry point for death. These stone closets were a marvel of medieval engineering, but they were also symbols of hierarchy. To have a private toilet meant power. To have none meant enduring filth daily. The medieval toilet was more than a seat over a hole. It was a mirror of the age itself. Ingenious, brutal, and unforgiving. Far from the stone walls and torchlit corridors of the nobility, life was much less forgiving. For peasants, toilets weren't carved into castle walls. They were carved into the earth. Imagine a small medieval village. Crooked wooden homes, thatched roofs, and muddy streets teeming with animals and children. At the edge of town, or sometimes right in the center, sat the communal cesspit. A shallow hole, dug hastily, filled with the waste of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people. There were no wooden seats, no walls of privacy, just a pit For many, chamber pots were the daily reality. Families kept them indoors, emptying them into the street each morning. And so the cobblestone lanes of medieval towns became rivers of filth. Residents flung waste out their windows with a cry of warning, "Guard loo!" A phrase that would echo centuries later in loo, the British word for toilet. But even if you dodged the flying contents, the waste still pooled in gutters, mixing with animal dung, rotten food, and rainwater. Streets turned into open sewers. Children played in it. Dogs lapped it up. Rats thrived in it. The smell was inescapable. Chroniclers wrote that in summer, entire districts reeked so strongly that the air seemed thick with disease. And they weren't wrong. Fecal matter didn't just stink. It killed. Typhoid, cholera, and dysentery spread like wildfire in towns where clean water was scarce. To drink from a contaminated well was a gamble with death. Yet peasants accepted it. They had no choice. To live in the Middle Ages was to coexist with filth. Waste disposal wasn't a private matter. It was part of the village, part of the daily rhythm. And as strange as it seems to us now, few questioned it. That was life, the stench of survival. While nobles had garderobes and peasants had cesspits, nearly everyone used chamber pots. Imagine a small clay pot, tucked beneath the bed, waiting through the night, in the dark hours, when cold winds rattled the shutters and wolves howled beyond the village. No one wanted to stumble outside to a pit, so they squatted over the pot. By morning, it brimmed with the night's collection, politely called night soil. But here's the twist. Someone had to empty it. For peasants, this meant tossing it into the street. For townsfolk, it often meant pouring it into rivers that doubled as water sources. In wealthier homes, servants bore the burden, carrying chamber pots like silent ghosts of hygiene, disposing of their master's waste in cesspits or streams. To be a servant in a noble household was to endure humiliation not just in duty, but in smell. And there was profit in filth. Farmers collected night soil and used it as fertilizer. Human waste became part of the agricultural cycle, spread across fields to feed the very crops people would later eat. Imagine bread, grown from wheat nourished by last season's chamber pots. Disgusting? Perhaps. But in an age where nothing went to waste, excrement was as much a resource as it was a problem. Even kings weren't spared. Henry VIII, notorious for his excesses, had servants known as the grooms of the stool. Their sacred duty? To assist the king in the most private of matters, ensuring cleanliness, comfort, and record-keeping of royal bowels. It was considered an honor, a position of trust, granting intimate access to the monarch. In medieval logic, there was power in waste. The chamber pot was the great equalizer of the Middle Ages. Everyone used one. Lords, peasants, monks, and soldiers. A pot, a seat, a burden to empty. Filth was not just a fact of life. It was a companion in every household. Now, picture this. It's midnight in a medieval city. The streets are silent except for the faint creak of carts. Lanterns sway as a group of men gather, armed not with swords but with shovels and barrels. Their job? To descend into the cesspits, the overflowing privies, the very guts of the city, and remove what no one else dared to touch. These men were called gong farmers, from the word gong, meaning dung. Their work was gruesome. By torchlight, they climbed down into pits chest deep with human waste, scraping and hauling it out bucket by bucket. The stench was overwhelming, clinging to skin, hair, and clothes no matter how much they washed. Some wore protective leathers, but most had nothing but rags. Suffocation was a real danger. Methane gas built up in the pits, and a single spark, or even the act of breathing too deeply, could kill. And yet, gong farmers were paid well. Filth, it seemed, had value. Night soil was collected and sold to farmers as fertilizer. Whole industries grew from excrement. Cities could not survive without these men. They were despised, ridiculed, sometimes even banned from entering public spaces because of their smell, but at the same time, they were essential. No gong farmer, no city. Still, the work was a curse. Chroniclers describe men fainting, dying, or emerging half alive from the depths of waste. They carried the stench everywhere, outcasts even as they saved lives. In the end, the gong farmer was both hero and pariah, an invisible guardian of public health in an age before sanitation.